Welcome to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. We bring you news and analysis from the front lines of the global struggle for social and economic justice. I'm your host, Brianna Griffith, and here's what's going down in your backyard and across the world. For this week, I would like to focus especially on the U.S. It seems like another U.S. Paramilitary attack against Venezuela. I just want to give people some context here for what went on in the early morning of Sunday, May 3rd. The National Bolivarian Armed Forces of Venezuela, along with Special Actions Forces of the Venezuelan National Police, repelled an armed invasion by speedboats off the coast of La Guaira, less than an hour from the Venezuelan capital, Caracas, which is very similar to paramilitary invasions of Latin American states. Obviously, the comparison is apt to the Bay of Pigs in Cuba, and is similar to what the Contras tried in Nicaragua in the 1980s and beyond. Venezuelan authorities found various weapons, such as 10 rifles, a Glock pistol, 2 machine guns, loaded cartridges of various calibers. Other objects included that were captured were identification documents, satellite telephones, uniforms, including a helmet with a U.S. flag on it, and 2 notebooks detailing the operation known as Operation Gideon. So I'd like to talk about all of this in the next half hour. To talk about this, we are joined by Jovanni Reyes, who is an organizer with About Face, Veterans Against the War. Thank you very much, Jovanni, for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Can you just give us the rundown? We now know the name of the mercenary company that was primarily involved in this. The Trump administration is still denying any involvement. I think Juan Guaido has also denied any involvement, although it seems increasingly clear that there was a level of coordination that would make this an absolutely apt to sort of previous U.S. paramilitary invasions and terrorist operations in the past. So what is it we know at this point as we record on May 8th about this operation in Venezuela?
Yes. So in your introduction, you mentioned the May 3rd attempt to enter Venezuela, but in actuality, there was 2 attempts, actually. There was another one on Monday, which is not spoken much about, also coming from on speedboats coming out of Colombia and trying to enter Venezuela Monday morning, and that was intercepted as well. And that's when the and in that one, that's when the 2 Americans also were arrested also that Monday as well. So there were actually 2 attempts to enter Venezuela by the coastline, by water. So this person named Jordan Guaido has this company out of Florida. Apparently, they do a lot of security, and that seems to be a trend right now with the whole war on terror and the whole, invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan and everything. A lot of these special ops people, they leave, they get out of the military and they start up their own security companies. I mean, the most famous of them will be Prince from the Blackwater Merc company. But yeah, so a lot of these guys, they're starting out their own security companies and everything. So this guy, apparently, he did security for the concert. The concert that was done at Cúcuta, Colombia last year, was done on March last year, where this British billionaire, right? He organized this big spectacle, this big concert supposed to be in humanitarian aid to raise money for aid for Venezuela, and the time this Jordan, he was pulling security there. That's what we know right now, and apparently that's where he first made contact with the Venezuelans, opposition, insurgents, and so forth. What's funny is that on that Sunday when that raid happened on Venezuela, Jordan gave an interview with this dissident journalist living in Florida. Her name is Patricia, I forget her last name, and where he talked about what happened, the mercenaries, how many people that they trained, how many people were trying to enter the country, which apparently there were like 60 men that were trying to enter. He showed a contract that on the video, it's on YouTube, that that it was signed by Guaido and a couple other people. A contract where Guaido had promised them $212 million for this operation to train Venezuelan insurgents that are located in Colombia. Apparently, there were like 200 or 300 of them. And apparently, according to Jordan, that the front money never really came through. The whole money, the whole dollars that that were promised before the operation fell through. Didn't really come through. He felt that he was backstabbed, but he went ahead with the operation anyway because, according to him, he was doing it to liberate the people of Venezuela, and he was live tweeting at also at the same time while the operation was going. So all this is going on at the same time, and in that contract that he showed Patricia on the interview that she gave him on the day of the incursion, the failed incursion, right? Obviously shows the signature of Juan Guaido and others, including people from the Mexican government of Peña Nieto, was also in the signature as well as witnesses, and people from Colombia, also important people from Colombia, was also there as witnesses as well. So there's a lot of people being implicated in this. He also gave an interview, he also did an announcement of the operation, because apparently he thought that either they thought that the operation was still going because it seemed like it was a pre-recorded announcement on YouTube with next to a former Venezuelan military guy who defected as well, and he was called. It was like an announcing the operation. It was a call to arms of the people of Venezuela and specifically the armed forces, because they've been trying to get the military to turn against the central government, for a long time now. For the last few years, they've been trying to get the military to go against the central government, and the military haven't. So he did a video, and it looks like the video was done before the operation, went ahead, where he made the call for the military to uprise, where he said that there were men coming into Venezuela from the east, from the west, and from the north. That they were making their way to Caracas right now. There's fighting going on right now, and for the military to do the right thing and join the cause. And that was put on YouTube as well. And like I say, it looked like it was recorded prior, before anything went down. But that's also you can be found that as well.
There are so many good reasons why the Venezuelan military is not going to split largely from the civilian-led government of Maduro. First of all, because it is the civilian-led government, because that is the function of a military, is to follow the lead of the civilian-led government. But then there's also the class character that I've talked about in previous episodes. Even during kind of previous periods of Venezuelan history, the Venezuelan military had a more kind of proletarian class character and had sort of an educational component about it of sort of raising to some degree class consciousness in a way that even especially other capitalist militaries really didn't have. But then there is also the kind of long history of attempted coups by the United States of Venezuela since Chavez was elected. There was the 2002 coup. The only coup, to my knowledge, that's ever been successfully reversed, to the extent where the force of the Venezuelan military loyal to the U.S. had taken control of the country. They had ousted Chavez. They had put him on a plane and tried to disappear him. And there was such popular protest in the streets that I think within 48 hours or so, I forget the exact timeline, they were forced to bring Chavez back and essentially surrender. And so at that point, did begin a process of sort of transformation of the Venezuelan military. Because if you were any sitting head of state, you can't have a military that's going to try and coup you whenever they believe they have sort of a political opportunity, who will take advantage of chaos and whatnot. And I think the other part of that is that we've seen over and over again the absolute sort of chaos within the camp of the right-wing opposition. At the time, the most recent kind of major coup attempt happened in 2019 when Juan Guaido declared himself president after Mike Pence had basically called him up personally, and Mike Pence had told Juan Guaido, declare yourself president and we will support you. We began getting reports after that of the Trump administration's frustration with the absolute fracturing of the Venezuelan opposition and sort of the greed of the Venezuelan right-wing opposition here. That essentially you had 10 people in a room with 12 or 13 opinions to them, who couldn't get along, who wanted various kind of levels of violence within the country, but were unable to stick to any sort of plan. And then after that, we have all of the leaks of what Juan Guaido and company were actually doing with the money being sent to him that the U.S. had forcibly seized, where essentially they were spending it on kind of booze and cocaine and parties, and essentially they were partying it up, living the high life as though they were still the kind of bourgeoisie within Venezuela. The last time I think, did see sort of some sort of defection, it was the same thing where essentially people in Venezuela, primarily kind of younger people who didn't necessarily believe in sort of progressive causes, who were just sort of interested in the money being promised to them. A handful of them defected across the border at the time all of this was going down in 2019, from Venezuela to Colombia. The far right-wing Duque regime of Colombia was sort of where they were defecting to, rather. I've been saying defecting. Where they were defecting to. So basically, once they defected and crossed the border into Colombia, they realized they were not going to get the money that Juan Guaido had promised them to defect. He was paying people to defect, and as Guaido has done over and over again, didn't actually follow through with his promise to pay them. So they wound up penniless and homeless when they reached the other side in Colombia. And eventually wound up back on the border, asking the Venezuelan military at the border to let them back in. And so we see this over and over again, specifically in Venezuela, this sort of pattern of people being promised a thing by the Guaido camp. And when they don't get essentially the money they were promised, when they don't get the support they were promised, they wind up flipping and telling everything they know. It seems like in this case, it took very, very little prompting for the mercenaries behind this to reveal the full extent of the Guaido camp's involvement in this.
You mentioned the concert in Cucuta, which that was, I forgot the name of that billionaire. Was a billionaire from Britain?
Was it Branson? Was it
Branson? That's what it was. He was the one that organized the concert, right? And he wanted to become the great humanitarian, and got all these Latin American singers, and rappers and whatnot to do this concert. And it was supposed to be this big thing, and it was supposed to be to push humanitarian aid inside Venezuela, because at that time that's when the sanction was really, really being clamped down and on Venezuela, the blockade and everything, and they were trying to push in humanitarian aid. That's when, if you recall, that's when all these videos started coming out of Venezuelans like eating from the trash and whatnot. I don't know if you remember Jorge Ramos. Jorge Ramos went down there to interview Maduro, and before that, it was funny because he got this video of these Venezuelans, this two Venezuelans like going through the trash and everything, and making it sound like that's what Venezuelans are doing. But behind the video that he was filming, there was people in the background walking around with grocery bags, so he didn't. I mean, all this montage to make to create this humanitarian crisis in Venezuela, to get sympathy from the West, so to get the consent of people in the West to accept a military intervention into Venezuela, right? It wasn't working out well for them because they were just like a bad script, they just don't know how to do it. And but during this time, during this concert, the concert was in February, actually. During this concert, February last year, they tried to invade because they were going to use the whole thing about the humanitarian aids to go in. You know, they were trying to force humanitarian aid in, right? Which the opposition itself burned, you know, in the bridge, to make it look like it was Maduro's government that burned the other aid coming in. But the video obviously showed Molotov cocktails coming from the Colombian side into the trucks that burned it down. But they were trying to put in insurgents. They were trying to get in insurgents, you know, Venezuelan, Colombian insurgents inside Venezuela at the time. They were trying to use that as a ruse or as a cover. You know, they were trying to enter from Colombia and from Bolivia as well. Not Bolivia, but Brazil. The Brazilian group were intercepted by the Venezuelan military, but the bulk of it was supposed to come out of Colombia, which the Colombian government pulled the plug because according to the Duque government, they weren't consulted that was what's going to happen, that they were going to push in insurgents inside Venezuela to try to overthrow the government. So they pulled the plug, and you got to take a big, you know, see the big picture here. The Colombian government is in shaky ground. The Colombian government is not really in a position of strength. If you notice last year in around December, where they had this massive anti-neoliberal protests happening in Colombia and Chile and all these neoliberal governments, right? They were having this massive protests out in the street before Corona and everything. Colombia was one of them, and they were calling for his resignation. So what is that telling you? That his government is not really in a position of strength, right? Any spillover from let's say an overthrow of the government in Venezuela, let's say it breaks into a civil war in Venezuela, right? That spillover is going to go into Colombia as well. So we're going to get massive refugees into Colombia, right? They might get uprisings into Colombia as well, right? From Colombians inside, you know. So they're not in a really strong position. So a lot of the things that the U.S. Washington is trying to push into Venezuela, right? If things go bad, like there's a good track record of things going back. If you look at Syria, if you look at Libya, look at Iraq, you know, every time the U.S. sends its military or tries to do some militarized action, right, things turn out bad. It haven't turned out good yet. It's not a good record of things turning out good after military incursion, right? Things, you know, normally has turned out worse. So Colombia is going to get the brunt of it. So that's something that they have in their mind. And one of the things I was looking to Colombian media were some Colombian senators and Colombian were worried of the position that Duque is going. Duque just seems to be blindly following the United States without considering any repercussion to his own country and trying to overthrow the Caracas government, right? And a lot of these the senators, this law people in Colombia were saying, "Hold, you gotta pull the rein. You know, we can't. You gotta back up because anything that happens in Venezuela is going to affect us." You know, I don't know if you remember. There was this. It's funny the way they act, because if you look at how this whole COVID thing is going down, Venezuela actually has the best approach in South America with the least amount of cases and death within the region in South America. When Colombia was being hit, because Colombia has taken the neoliberal approach where they put profit over people, they have a large number of infected people and a lot of number of deaths. So Venezuela offered supplies that they were getting from the Chinese and the Russians. They offered them some supplies also to help the Colombian people, where the Colombian government said that they will only take the supply if it was coming from Guaido. You know, it was funny because I was listening to because according to the Colombian government, Guaido is the real president of Venezuela, not Maduro. So it was funny because a Colombian radio host, radio station was interviewing a Colombian diplomat, and they were talking about that, and the Colombian radio host was asking, you know, will Colombia take the aid that Venezuela is offering? Because Venezuela also offered aid to several Caribbean islands as well, and they've well received it, part of the ALBA group. And the Colombian officer, the Colombian diplomat person, say, you know, they will take it if it, you know, all they have to do is just wait for Guaido to give the order, and they'll take it, right? And they'll take the supply. And it's funny because the radio host told him, the Colombian diplomat, right, I can tell you what Guaido is going to do. He's going to do nothing because he doesn't run the country. I can tell you right now, he doesn't run the country. He's not going to give you anything. But it was funny the way that radio host was grilling that diplomat guy. But yeah, so that's where Colombia is sitting right now. So they're playing this game. They're playing this game with the United States, with the support of Marco Rubio and Elia Abram and all the Mike Pence and what's the other one? Bob Menendez. I mentioned all these people because both Cruz, Menendez, and Rubio were named actually by the Bolivian opposition, the Bolivian that overthrew the government of Evo Morales. Right? They named them in a recording as supporters, and they're having contact with these three American lawmakers. So that's something that the Americans need to know, that these lawmakers are actively getting themselves involved in overthrowing governments. So all these people, they need to realize that what they're doing is going to, Colombia, they realize that they're being pushed into a precipice, and if things go bad in Venezuela, it's going to go bad for them as well.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that when we were again so concerned, when the U.S. rather was so allegedly concerned about the human rights in Venezuela, because when I think of people who are really deeply concerned about human rights, the first people I think of are Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Marco Rubio, and Elliot Abrams, who was one of the major players behind the Iran-Contra scandal. Those are the first people I think of when I think of real staunch human rights defenders, right? When so much of this alleged concern about human rights was coming out of Venezuela, of course, first of all, nothing was being said about the Duque regime in Colombia, which is one of the when we use the term neoliberal, the term neoliberalism comes out of the Chicago School of Economics, the same school which was responsible essentially for the shock doctrine, the shock therapy economics of essentially destroying all public infrastructure and forcing this destruction with military might of the Pinochet regime. Most people know the dictatorship of Pinochet, but they may not know that same economic, social, and political model is essentially still being implemented in many parts of Latin America, many parts of the U.S. really. But that neoliberal destruction of public infrastructure and subsequent increase in military and police repression, that is the Duque regime. Both of these major countries have played this part in the coup. Colombia and Brazil under Bolsonaro last year, even they are forced to, I think, back off the intensity of the destabilization that the Trump administration is trying to carry out here.
Bolsonaro wanted to, when he were elected, one of the things he did was kick out the Cuban doctors out of, in Bolivia. Now they're paying the price now because Brazil is the epicenter of the coronavirus in South America. They have the highest death rate, and they have the highest infection rate in South America. And that's one of the things that the Colombian, the Cuban doctors were doing in Brazil, was actually strain out medical attention to the most rural area and the most. You got to think about these societies in Latin America. They're very unequal societies, right? Very stratified societies, very unequal societies, where you have the region of Latin America is not considered a poor region. They're considered mid-income countries, not poor countries, mid-income countries, right? And countries like Mexico and Chile, they're considered wealthy countries, right? Because they're going by GDP, so they're not poor countries per se. And Brazil is the largest economy in South America, right? But the wealth is concentrated. They mostly concentrated in the big city and the capitals. They mostly concentrate in the hands of the few. They hoard their money for one thing, or they don't invest their money in the country. What they rather invest their money in the stock market in New York, or they invest their money in London, or they invest their money elsewhere, but not in their own country, right? So you have this disparity, this wealth disparity in these countries, right? So what the Cuban doctors were doing in Colombia, in Brazil, they were reaching out to all these marginalized communities, right, and giving medical attention to these communities that a lot of them haven't really gone to doctors because they can't afford it, or they live too far away from the cities, and they just don't go. So they rely mostly on medicinal, remedies, like traditional medicinal remedies and so forth. So one of the things that Bolsonaro did when he came into the country, into the power, he kicked the Cuban doctors out, and not only he kicked the Cuban doctors out, he also severe business relations with the Chinese as well at the behest of Washington. And one of the things that he wanted to do was to overthrow the Venezuelan government, and he was calling for an invasion, a Brazilian invasion of Venezuela. Now, Brazil has the largest military in South America, and one of the strongest military in South America as well. Between Brazil and Colombia. Colombia has a lot of military equipment, U.S. military equipment under Plan Colombia. They were getting like Colombia is like the fourth military aid recipient of the United States, in the world. So they get a lot of aid from the United States, the military. But Brazil has the largest military, and they have indigenous weapons as well. They have planes that they create and all that stuff. So one of the things that they wanted to do was to invade Venezuela, Bolsonaro, which is one of his chief of staff, his general, right, said, no, we can't do that. And he pulled it off, and he went against his boss and said, no, we're not going to do that because it's going to go bad for them. Because for one thing, an invading army, 9 times out of 10, is going to lose. It's going to lose when they invade when they try to invade and occupy another country. They're going to lose because they're going to get not only their military, they're going to get the rally the people also are going to defend their territory. So they're going to lose. They're going to lose a lot of money. They're going to lose a lot of men. So they're going to end up having to withdraw. And that's the scenario that the general was painting. We can't do that. So he had to pull back. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
We've absolutely seen this. This has been a real historic defeat, I think, of the U.S. in Venezuela. And we're also seeing generally the stalling out, I would say, of the U.S. Empire globally, even though the U.S. Has continued to maintain something between 800 and 1,000 military bases, depending on what statistic you're using worldwide. We've seen the continued failure of the U.S. to establish global dominance, and I think that's a good place to wrap it up. We were joined by Jovanni Reyes, who's an organizer with About Face, to talk about the latest U.S. coup attempt, against Venezuela, the Venezuelan Bay of Pigs, as we might call it here. Thank you very much, Jovanni, for coming back on the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates on KOOP 91.7 FM Austin and is also broadcast on WHIV 102.3 FM New Orleans. We are available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. Stay tuned. Now it is once again time for Union News with Ken Zarifis. Ken is the president of Education Austin, and about once a month or so, we talk about the latest news regarding the Educators Union, as well as just general sort of information about union organizing, etc. So yeah, Ken, glad to have you on. Thanks for coming on once again.
Well, Brianna, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate during this pandemic that we still have access to this great forum.
Yeah, always glad to provide a voice, especially for those who are providing such a valuable public service as educators and other staff and employees at AISD are at the moment. So I'm wondering if you can just talk kind of really briefly about what's sort of, how everybody's responded and how everybody's kind of holding up, within AISD for during COVID.
Yeah, well. First of all, I just want to thank you for this, and I hope you're staying safe and out of harm's way as well, Brianna. What we're seeing is an amazing effort on the side of workers in AISD. Teachers, custodians, food service, the service center. It's just bus drivers and monitors. It's just been quite amazing, because it was just about a little more than a month ago that the world just seemed to literally stop on all of us. And it was just really a a big transition for all of us. And to watch what teachers and the school employees have done has really been nothing short of remarkable. It's not a miracle because they're all working hard and they're unbelievable workers and what we're referring to as heroes. I think what the district did early on, Brianna, is that the focus was really so heavy on what they know best. It's curriculum, instruction. And so they started to build things that were around curriculum and instruction and throw it down on the teachers. And there just became this enormous weight on teachers and parents and students as, understandably, people are trying to search around in the dark and figure out where they are at. But the districts, kind of their focus for the last couple of years has been strive, read, excel. And they even publicly continued to promote that as the priorities in the early days of this pandemic. And we really had to say, you got to change. And our perspective, and from Education Austin, we're saying be safe, be supported, be connected. That our first priority is to make sure that those we love and we're connected to are safe. That's family, that's friends, that's our students, that's just the system in our communities as a whole. But make sure that we're being there as a supportive voice, a shoulder, someone that can support them through these difficult times, and then connect them to the things they need in terms of social services, supports, educational curriculum, regardless of who it is. And I think that by focusing on curriculum rather than people, the district got way ahead of itself and has had to back up by making some unfortunate quick actions. So that's where we've tried to pivot and shift everybody into this new kind of set of priorities. Be safe, supported, and connected.
If people are such essential workers as the AISD teachers and staff and employees have been, that they deserve to be really paid like they absolutely are essential to society. To me, all workers are essential workers to society, but those who are stepping up now, those who are in hazard's way right now, should never, ever have to worry about any sort of, I think, financial security. Like if in these sort of economic contractions like we're facing now, it often becomes the excuse to institute what I think Naomi Klein calls disaster capitalism, and what other people also call disaster capitalism. This idea that when things are tough or when there's a major upheaval, that's the time at which the people at the bottom need to tighten their belts, need to start scrounging and not spend, do everything they can to weather this, where those at the top continue to get bailouts and whatnot.
Yes. And I would contend I'd rather take my belt off and start whipping the money changers in the temple. That's what I'd like to start doing, because I don't need to tighten my belt any more than I've already tightened. A bus driver can't tighten their belt anymore, lest it creates some internal bleeding and they die. I go back to Malcolm. Show me a capitalist and I'll show you a bloodsucker. And that's exactly what's happening here, is that the product within any industry, be it cars, be it medicine, be it trinkets that we all feel like we have to buy every damn day, or be it education, that we are getting the economics of it in front of the important thing, and that is human beings. But that's what capitalism does. It prioritizes bottom lines, not people. I hope, the only thing I've got right now is a hope that in this we learn things. My hope is that parents and the community members begin to understand how insanely hard educating 150 kids in secondary and 22 pre-reading learners in elementary to learn, to teach them, and how hard the profession of teaching actually is. I hope we learn that. I hope we learn that we don't survive without the support of our classified employees that are willing to go out and deliver Chromebooks and food and books to people. I hope that we learn that people being safe and secure and supported is more important than the economic well-being of a district or a state. Because if we wanted to fix this, Brianna, if we wanted to make sure that people were okay, that they didn't worry about rent, that they weren't panicked whether they can get food to eat tonight, that they didn't have to worry, we could fix that if as a country we wanted to. It's not impossible. The suggestion that unless we open up the economy the way the economy was to provide for people is insulting. One of the recommendations for reopening in schools is bringing students in, social distancing them in the classroom, which means you would only be able to have maybe a third of your class, and then rotate them Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday. They want to do that. That's one of the recommendations that's been put out there. It is so asinine. There's no way you do that without massive daycare, without extending our classroom for the next 3. I mean, it's impossible. We shouldn't even be talking. Time shouldn't be spent talking about this. Ludicrous.
Across all sectors, I think, of society right now, we're seeing absolutely ludicrous proposals to reopen this or that in the midst of a pandemic where social distancing should be the absolute, this kind of like 6 foot distance should be the absolute minimum. And really, like, we need more than that. We need like an actual social distancing where people are staying home as long as possible. We haven't seen the second wave hit. Traditionally, historically, the second wave of the pandemic is far more deadly. It's the deadliest wave of the 3 kind of major waves, for instance, of the Spanish flu or whatnot. And so to be talking about reopening next school year is absolutely ludicrous, because, and the other part of that is, like, we know that class sizes are already way too large at the facility. So yeah, there's no way to reopen schools without building, I'd say, 5 times as many facilities and hiring 5 times as many teachers.
I completely agree with you. It's for us to respect the basic, just the foundational, what scientists, and I'm putting my money into scientists instead of Billy Bob. I want scientists telling me what we need to do. And what we need to do at the very basic, you're right, it's social distancing. And the ridiculousness of some people feeling that is an infringement on their freedoms, while they begin to invade my space in a way that I find inappropriate and dangerous. And so it really, we see the extremes, and it's a lot of different groups, but we see the extremes of losing all sense of rationale and only relying on their gut. And we end up with these fights that waste our time, and that we should just be firm and assertive, and this is what we're going to do, and we're going to make sure that we all get through it.
In order to really make sure that people are safe, we need that sort of collective struggle, because we've seen, especially at state and federal level, and in some parts of the country at city levels, we've seen an absolute willingness to sacrifice worker lives for quote unquote the economy. And so the way to fight back, the mechanism that workers have to advocate on their own behalf and to show that, that we're serious about stuff, is through kind of union struggles. So I'm wondering if we can talk brief, in our couple minutes, if we can talk about how the union is responding, how the union is sort of moving forward and making sure that people are safe, that this is done in a safe way. And then if we can also talk about this on Education Austin's called Support AISD Teachers and School Employees.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is what we're up against. When spring break was approaching, and then the day it was called, the classes were shut down on that Friday, and the following week, which was spring break, where people get their spring break, everybody's paid. That means hourly and contract employees alike get paid through that time. An upper administrator came to Education Austin and said, "We're going to send the bus drivers and the custodians back out to the campuses." And we said, "Well, what are you going to pay them?" Well, they weren't going to pay them anything. And we fussed with them. And it was, no, they're at will and they're non-contract employees. We can. Here's the problem. We can. It's not a moral we can or can't. They're not looking at the moral or the ethical should or shouldn't. They're looking at the legal can or can't, which legal doesn't, we all know, does not necessarily espouse ethics or morality. And so when you're coming up against a district that has these poisonous attitudes within, that they can just use people because the law says they can. It is a constant battle for us throughout the year on any HR or human issue, is this issue of ethics and morality, not just the law. And so when you're facing that, it's difficult. So they weren't going to pay them. So we fussed and we pushed back and we did what we needed to do, had people call, and they agreed to pay people time and a half on top of their spring break pay. So for people that went out into whatever spaces that were dangerous while they were out there, they got paid time and a half on top of their spring break pay. When we came back, the district wanted to revert back to regular pay. We had to go again. No, you can't do that. We need to maintain the time and a half. Now, that doesn't mean time and a half on top of existing pay. We simply said you have to keep paying people that go out and risk their lives at time and a half. Again, it took a fight and a push, and finally that was approved. And then it was going to go away in the middle of May. Again, we had to fight and to bring it to their attention, and it has been approved through the end of the year. But these are the constant silly fights that we face, that we shouldn't have to face. We made sure that teachers, they're anticipating some loss of, they're anticipating constriction. So there may be a need to move teachers around in the district. They were going to make changes to the contract that we did not approve of. We had to fight, push back, and stop those changes to the contract. So, this is the endless battle of union and management. Management trying to screw the workers, and union trying to stand up with their workers to say no. We want to make sure that people are paid, so we want a 3% across the board pay raise. The district had recommended a 1.5 before the pandemic. After the pandemic, they took it away. Just disgusting. The very people that are saving you, the very people carrying your water. I don't see any upper administration. I don't see anybody delivering Chromebooks. I don't see anybody out there every day doing this, risking their lives. They're in offices and in their homes. We demand that people that are doing this work are recognized and respected economically.
If you're interested in learning more, you can visit Education Austin on Facebook. I believe Twitter as well. Is that correct?
Yes, you can do Twitter. And we actually have a petition we'd love to have people sign, Brianna. It's just to support the 3% pay raise, $500 for hourly employees for taking the greatest risks in the district, a $500 bonus at mid-year, and that the district shows that they don't just want to acknowledge heroes, but they respect them economically.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We were talking with Ken Zarifis, who's the president of Education Austin. Thanks, Ken, for coming back on once again.
My pleasure, Brianna. Take care.
And now it is time for our last segment of the week. This is Tech for the People with Chris Garaffa. Chris is a technologist based in New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming back on.
Hey, thanks for having me back on. Great to be back with you.
Yeah. Let's talk about this Reuters article you sent. This is a special report titled "Cyber Intel Firms Pitch Governments on Spy Tools to Trace Coronavirus." This has been sort of, I think, a running concern of people, is that some of the tracing tools around COVID carriers and whatnot could be used as just general sort of surveillance technology, and that we would increase that sort of like the normalization of surveillance even more than we've already seen. I'm wondering if you can just kind of give us a rundown on what people should kind of understand about this.
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing a lot of proposals to use technology to trace the spread of coronavirus. And I think on a surface level, that makes sense, right? We all have phones on us. We all, we're online. And if we go outside, our phones know exactly where we are all the time. And contact tracing is nothing new. It's been done for viruses and for outbreaks for many, many years. It was one of the ways that researchers were able to track the spread of HIV. in the mid to late 80s. But unfortunately, contact tracing does take time. You have to call people. They have to remember where they went, things like that. So if the idea here is that by using cell phone signals and other geolocation signals, we can identify people who have been in contact with each other and then let them know if somebody that they have been in contact with, whether it's somebody who lives with them or just somebody that they passed by walking down the street has been diagnosed and confirmed to have COVID-19. Well, in theory, this sounds great, but technology itself is a neutral tool. What happens where it goes good or bad is in how it's being used. And so in this case, we're talking about governments around the world, the US, India, Israel, and a number of others, the UK, France, looking at using apps and other technologies in order to trace and track COVID-19. And this causes a significant amount of concern for me. In this Reuters report, they say there's 8 different companies around the world that are pitching different countries on tracing and basically surveillance capability. The 2 primary companies that we're talking about are Celebrate and the NSO Group. And I think those are the ones that if you've heard of any of these, you would have heard of those 2. Celebrate sells something called the Gray Key. And the way this is used already is that law enforcement agencies plug your phone into the Gray Key, and it makes a copy of everything on your phone and then tries to get into it over and over and over. So even if you have protections on your phone with a strong passcode, the Gray Key will just try forever to crack that. Apple keeps putting in, especially on the iPhone, Apple keeps putting in measures to stop them. Gray Key and Celebrate does research and finds ways around it, and it's kind of like this cat and mouse game between them. So Celebrate is selling and pitching, from what we know, to the Delhi police in India that when somebody tests positive, they can just take their phone and look up the patient's location data and their contacts, which that doesn't even get into privacy violations that we and rights that we have here in the United States. But that's the kind of technology that Celebrate has, right? They would just suck it up and then look up all your location data that's stored on your phone and the contacts that are stored on your phone. And this is something they're selling to the government, to the police force in Delhi, in India, but this is being spread all over the world, these kinds of proposals to track coronavirus using surveillance tools. The other group that we want to talk about is the NSO Group. And the NSO Group is a very shady Israel-based company that really, it gets a lot of its it tests a lot of its surveillance products against Palestinians. And we should, be sure to mention that particularly in the West Bank, the NSO Group and a lot of the other Israeli technology firms first implement and test their products against the oppressed Palestinian people. Well, the NSO Group, we might remember a few months ago, the NSO Group was responsible for a hack on the WhatsApp app, that chat app that's owned by Facebook, where basically without you doing anything, their software could take over your phone. They're actually being sued in California over that by WhatsApp, and that's a very interesting case as well to follow. The NSO Group is now saying that they're building a tracking platform for the Israeli government. And they're claiming, and I want to say that this is a controversial claim, but they're claiming they can figure out your location within 3 feet of where you are. So even if that's true, that would require putting the spy software on the phones of millions of people. And so, these 2 companies, along with at least 6, but probably many, many others, that already invest and create spy technology for police and governments, are now trying to use this spy technology to, under the guise of tracking the spread of COVID-19. I don't trust them at all. I don't trust any government that is going to use these tools either.
Yeah, it's incredible how some of these names continue to come up. Some of these same companies continue to come up in our discussions on these things, especially those who are involved in this sort of the Israeli oppression of Palestinians, because I think for these kind of global surveillance companies and for global weapons contractors and whatnot, a lot of these Israel or Palestine rather, winds up being sort of the testing grounds for essentially whatever sort of weapons of war, weapons of surveillance are being developed. Palestine essentially acts unwillingly as the guinea pig for a lot of this. The other part of that initially hits me is just how absolutely absurd at this point this pretense of using COVID to track people on a sort of this individual level, because COVID is already a pandemic, to try and go with to try and reach out to everyone they've been in contact with. It seems that should be alarming to people just on kind of the surface level, because of the fact that essentially, as we're talking about, it is a pandemic at this point.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think, at this point, scientists might want to know, and they might want to be able to track, and I'm all for that, right? For scientists to be able to track and understand the spread of pandemics. I think that's extremely important for dealing with future pandemics. But if we're not putting money right now into testing and treatment and PPE and all of the things that we need, then all of this, even for science, will be of very little use to the people who are dying at an astounding rate, and who will be dying at the rate, over 3,000 people per day at this point in the United States alone. So, yeah, this is just an excuse. I want to point out, too, that when the Chinese government started, locking down cities and started doing some contact tracing itself, it was called authoritarian by the U.S. and European, Western European governments. But now they're trying, they're doing the same things, right? And the lockdowns are good. These are important, and we should say that. Lockdowns and making sure that people, aren't at restaurants, and that there's social distancing, especially, and wearing masks in stores. Those are good things. And experts, I'm not a medical expert, so I trust the medical experts that have studied these things. They're telling us those are important things. In China, it was important to have contact tracing because it originated, as far as we can tell, primarily in China, right? And so, that can actually help curb the initial spread of a disease like this. But we know it is everywhere. Every state and practically every nation in the world has dealt with, some better than others, the spread of coronavirus. We can look at Vietnam, where there were 0 deaths, very close to China, or we can look at the United States, where the number grows just at an astounding rate every day. The money that is being put into this, that the NSO Group and Celebrate and so many of these other companies, including Palantir, which also does work for ICE, want to make on this, these governments should be putting that into treatment and personal protective equipment.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. Is that, when we think of technology, it's ultimately, it's not inherently good or evil. It's simply a tool to be used. And of course, the technologies developed in any given society reflect the class character, reflect the social, political, and economic really makeup of that society. And so we have to ask ourselves what technologies are being developed within the U.S. and within our capitalist countries, and what is sort of the bent of these technologies. And these technologies, as we're talking about, as you mentioned, I think, which is really important, is that the technologies are being developed to track and conduct surveillance on a mass level. And yet there's still, even if you were to do that, even if you were to successfully track down, again, if we take the pretense here that they're trying to track down COVID carriers, even if you successfully do that, even if you successfully trace who might have COVID, if you still don't have the treatment for that, if you still don't have the testing for that, which most of the U.S. still doesn't, months and months, almost half a year into COVID, there's really not this sense of urgency of still getting the ventilators to hospitals, still getting a treatment, a vaccine, et cetera. Like it's still not coming. But again, like this technology to start this surveillance appears very, very quickly. It sort of dovetails, I think, with sort of the theories around disaster capitalism, where essentially, these different companies, these different corporations take advantage of a either natural or human-caused disaster or another crisis of one sort or another to, first of all, make a huge profit, but then second of all, sort of erode whatever basic either social safety nets or, in this case, sort of protections of privacy might have existed in that society prior to the disaster.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And, I think we can use technology for wonderful things. It has been used and is used for awful things as well. We need a system really that puts puts the needs of the people first, that can use technology to, make sure that we have enough testing and figure out where the testing needs to be, but also to help distribute food for those who are at risk if they just go to a grocery store right now and who can't afford, Grubhub every day or ridiculous things like that, right? There's so much we could do with technology, with machine learning, with artificial intelligence, that is not just, sucking up all of the location data on your phone and hacking WhatsApp. But unfortunately, the profit motive and the international spy world, effectively, from the intelligence communities, that's what they want to do. That is exactly what, they want to put their money into. It's an outrageous waste and also a violation of our rights.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good place to go ahead and wrap up. We were joined for this last segment by Chris Garaffa. Chris, of course, is technologist based in New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you very much, Chris, for coming back on the show.
Great. Thanks for having me on.
That's all we have for this week. You have been listening to People's Republic with Brianna Griffith. People's Republic originates in Austin, Texas, and is also available as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are podded. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at People's Radio ATX for more news and analysis. We are out of here.